The term fraud means a false representation of fact. Fact means truth, unmai, made willfully, knowingly, intentionally, with a view to deceive the other party, the party to whom you are making a contract with. You want to cheat them, deceive maybe. As it looks, it's okay, but there is something wrong, with a view to deceive. It is dealt under section 17, fraud. The suggestion as to a fact of that which is not true by one who doesn't believe it to be true. Means I don't believe something is correct, but I tell you that it is true. Right? That's fraud. First, it is active concealment. Active means knowingly hide the facts. Active concealment. A promise made without any intention of performing it. Only tell but don't do it. A promise made without any intention of performing it. Again, any such act or omission as the law specifically declares to be fraudulent. There is something specifically written by law that includes any other act fitted to deceive. What is the meaning of fraud? Section 17 defines a fraud. We already saw that. Any of the following acts committed by a party to a contract or with his connivance or by his agent with intent to desire another party thereto or his agent or to induce him to enter into a contract. Fraud means in a law committed by a party. Somebody is in a contract, he does something with his connivance. Connivance means both acting together knowingly, the other person also, some other person, right? Or by his agent, his representative, with the intent to desire another party thereto or his agent. Maybe the third part, the party who is entering into contract into, or his agent, or to induce him to enter into a contract. Inducing means invite him or making him feel it is good, that way. The suggestion as to a fact that which is not true by one who doesn't believe it to be true. We know this. X sells a locally manufactured goods as imported goods, charging a higher price. It amounts to fraud. The active concealment of a fact by one having knowledge or belief of the fact. Mere concealment is no fraud. Active concealment means you intentionally conceal, even though if he sees it, you cannot find out, that way you make some changes kind of thing. That is called active concealment. Steps are taken by a seller concealing some material facts so that the buyer, even after a reasonable examination, cannot trace the defects. It will amount to fraud. A furniture dealer conceals the cracks in the furniture sold by him using a packing material and polishing it in such a way that the buyer, even after reasonable examination, cannot trace the defect. It would tantamount to fraud through active concealment. What is the active concealment here? The furniture dealer did some pasting material or whatever inside the cracks, so that if you look prima facie, it may look very neat, polished, but there was a hole or there was a defect that was concealed. This is called active concealment. A promise made without any intention of performing it. Shirin versus John A man and a woman underwent a ceremony of marriage with the husband, not regarding it as a real marriage. Means what? Husband was thinking it is not a marriage, but he was performing it. Now what happened? He was not having an intention, so it's a the consent of the wife is made under fraud. The husband knowingly through the whole process that he doesn't want to marry, but still married, concealing it. That is a without intention of marrying. That is a fraud. Any such act or omission as the law specially declares to be fraudulent. Under the Companies Act and Insolvency Acts, certain kinds of transfers have been declared to be fraudulent. So you may not know explicitly now, but when you study Company Act or Insolvency Acts, when the time comes, you may know that. But at least know now, the law declares something as fraudulent omission. If you do that, it's a fraud. Any other act fitted to deceive. It covers those acts with the deceive but not covered under any other class. So it is just to be safe. Any other act. What are the essential elements of a fraud? Fraud should have essential elements. One is by a party to a contract. The fraud should have been committed by a party to a contract. Suppose X and Y are in contract, X should have committed a fraud or Y should have committed a fraud. Or by anyone with his connivance. Suppose the connivance means the collusion, means the whatever. Actively he was going with him. Maybe X is in connivance with somebody else, committed a fraud on Y. Or by his agent, his representative did a fraud. Thus, a fraud by a manager to a contract doesn't affect the validity of the contract. Manager is not an agent. Agent means authorized representation. The directors, what are the essential elements? This is the next one. The directors of the company issued a prospectus containing false statements. A shareholder who has subscribed for the shares on the faith of the prospectus wanted to avoid the contract. It was held that he could do so because the false statement made by directors amounted to fraud. Very clear. False representation. There must be a false representation, it must be made with the knowledge of its falsehood. Means what? You know something is false, you still do it. That is a false representation. Where the representation was true at the time when it is made but becomes untrue before the contract is entered into. This fact is known to the party who made the representation. It must be corrected. It is not so corrected, will amount to fraud. You know something is wrong, right? Still you went ahead with the contract. If you tell it's a problem, then it's okay. If you don't tell, knowingly there is a problem, then it amounts to fraud. X fraudulently informs Y that X estate is free from encumbrance. Encumbrance means what? Will and gum. Somebody else has got a right, that's called encumbrance. On the faith of X statement, Y buys the estate. Actually, the estate is subject to mortgage. Mortgage means you keep the estate and get the loan. So it is with the bank. Here Y may avoid the contract because X with the intention to receive Y induced Y to enter into a contract even though X knows this property is under mortgage. On 1st January, X correctly informs Y that monthly sales of his business are 1 lakh rupees. In May, the contract of sale of business was signed. Right? January says 1 lakh. May, the contract was signed. During the period, the sales has decreased to 50,000. So now he knows there is a problem. Right? If he doesn't tell, amounts to fraud. Actually deceived. The fraud must have actually deceived the other party who has acted on the basis of such representation. Suppose I am trying to deceive you, you should have deceived, you should have gotten deceived. So then only. In other words, an attempt to deceive the other party by which the other party is not actually deceived is not a fraud. I tried, but you did not do it, did not get into, so it is not a fraud. X had a defective cannon. Cannon is a gun type of thing. In order to conceal the defect, he put a metal plug on it. Y bought this cannon without examining. When Y used it, it burst. Y refused to pay the balance. Burst means there is a hole in that cannon, so when you are firing, the metal expands and it bursts. Y didn't want to pay. It was Y was liable to pay as he was not actually deceived by fraud because he would have bought even if no deceptive plug was inserted. Here you should have seen the without examining, like we are seeing. Even after careful examination, if you cannot find it, then only you call it as active concealment. Here it is without examining, so it is not a fraud, so they have to pay money. You should have suffered loss because of fraud. The party acting on the presentation must have suffered some loss. What are the effects of fraud? Right to resign the contract. Resign means cancel. The party whose consent was caused by fraud can resign the contract, but he cannot do so. He can cancel, but he cannot do. Where silence amounts to fraud. The aggrieved party cannot resign the contract if he had the means of discovering the truth with any ordinary diligence. Ordinary diligence means some simple analysis he could have found. If he is not doing that, then that is he cannot resign. Where silence amounts to fraud. Somebody is not telling, that is a silence. And you, little analysis you could have found out, then it's not a fraud. Where the party gave the consent in ignorance of fraud. You are not sure of the fraud, so you cannot sign. Where the party, after becoming aware of the fraud, takes a benefit under the contract. Means what? You resell it to somebody else. You take the benefit. You cannot cancel. Where an innocent third party, before the contract is assigned, acquires consideration of some interest in the party passing under the contract. In the property passing under the contract. Means what? Somebody else takes an interest. Interest means maybe acquiring it or buying it. Where the parties cannot be restored to their original form. Suppose you are selling a coffee powder. He makes coffee out of it. The form is changed, right? You cannot do it. Right to insist upon performance. The party whose consent was caused by fraud may, if he thinks fit, insist that the contract shall be performed and he shall be put in the position to which he would have been if the representation made had been true. Right? You do the contract, then he may say that. A fraudulently informs B that A's estate is free from encumbrance. Now he might say, you restore the mortgage and give it back to me. That may good. Right to claim damages. His consent itself caused by fraud can claim damages if he suffers some loss. Does silence amount to fraud? Let's see. General rule for silence is, according to explanation to section 17, mere silence as to facts likely to affect the willingness of the person to enter into a contract is not fraud. We already saw this. The person has got some little diligence, little intelligence, little analysis, finds out, then silence is not fraud. A sells by action to B a horse which knows to be unsound. A says nothing to B about the horse unsoundness. This is not fraud by A. He did not say horse is very good. He just sells a horse. If he says horse is very good, then he is concealing the fact. Here he did not say horse is very good. That you have to see. A and B, being traders, enter upon a contract. A has private information of a change in prices which affect the B's willingness to proceed with their contract. A is not bound to inform B. Means what? Both are traders, right? Both of them can find the same information. In Sri Krishna vs. Kurukshetra University, candidate failed to mention fact of a shortage of attendance in examination form. Here no fraud. The university should have found out. Exceptions. So far we have seen what is the general rule. General rule that silence doesn't amount to fraud has the following exceptions. Where the circumstances of the case are such that regard being had to them, it is a duty of the person keeping silence to speak. Where the circumstances of the case, surnilai of this case are such that regard being had to them, it is a duty of the person keeping silence to speak. Right? Situation arises, the person has to speak. Where the parties stand in fiduciary relationship, like a parent-child, trustee-beneficiary, then he has to speak. A sells by action to B a horse which A knows to be unsound. B is A's daughter and just comes of age. Here the relation between the parties would make it A's duty to tell B if the horse is unsound. So if you have a duty to the other person, there is a fiduciary relationship, you cannot keep silence. You have to tell. If you don't tell, there is fraud. Depends on the relationship. Where silence itself is equivalent to speech. Example, B says to A, if you do not deny it, I shall assume the horse is sound. A says nothing. Here A's silence is equivalent to speech. If the horse turns out to be vicious, then A can be liable for fraud. Half-truth, Padi Unmai, is worse than a blatant lie. Partial truthfulness disclosures may easily deceive the other party. only tell half the thing. Prospect to the company disclosing only average dividend declared by the company in the last 5 years, instead of actually declining dividends over that period, is a glaring example of half-truth amounting to fraud. So you might have not declared for a period of 2 years, or your dividend might have been declared declining. But you are saying maybe first year you declared a dividend of maybe 25%. Now your dividend may be 5%, but it is declining. But you are saying an average dividend is very high. So that is off truth. That is a fraud.